Good afternoon. My name is Katrina or Kate Albright. Here's my card. Today is March 19th, 2021. This is my skeletal presentation for UNE Anatomy 1005. Good afternoon from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Today we're going to be talking about the skeletal system. Two components of the skeletal system we're going to talk about are the axial skeletal system and the appendicular skeletal system. I got to show you my card that I'm going to be using here. So the axial system consists of the skull, which includes the cranium and the bones of the face or the facial bones. The thoracic cage, which for us is going to entail the ribs here and the sternum or the breastbone, and the vertebrae. The vertebrae here in the back, the sacrum, and the coccyx. Coccyx differs for each person. Some people have 3 bones of the coccyx. Some people have 5 bones of the coccyx. It's also called our tailbone. When we fall with enough force, we break these bones here. You can see it on the X-ray. You'll see the displacement of those bones when they're fractured when you fall. The appendicular skeleton is going to be the pectoral girdle, which is going to be composed of the clavicle here across, and these flat bones in the back, the scapula. The upper limbs, so we've got our humerus, our radial, ulna, the short bones of the hands, which are called the metacarpals, carpal being wrist, carpal tunnel, things like that, and the phalanges of the fingers. The pelvic girdle here, which you can see, are just our hip bones, make up our pelvic girdle. And then the long bones of the lower limbs, here we've got our femur, we've got our tib fib, we've got the short bones of the metatarsals, tarsal being ankle, and then our phalanges that make up our toes. Our body skeletal system has bones that are different shapes, and we're going to talk about the 7 different shapes of our skeletal system. First, we're going to start out with the sutural bones. The sutural bones are going to be found where we have a suture line. Here we have a coronal suture line, and so we would see an irregular bone up in here that would be a suture bone. So those suture bones come from 2 different ossification systems when the skull is being formed and ossified as an infant. Next up, we have our pneumatized bones. Those are going to be like in with the ethmoid bone. They're going to be the hollow, very light bones that we think of when we take a deep breath. We think of like a swirling eddy where the air gets in and is cleaned and warmed and moisturized before it gets down into our lungs. That's where that happens in those pneumatized bones. We have the short bones. So the short bones we're going to see in the metatarsals, the metacarpals and the metatarsals. So they're the short square bones in here, and those are covered with compact bone for stability, but on the inside, if we open it up and look, it's spongy bone on the inside. So we want the spongy bone to be lighter, so that when we move around, we don't have the weight heavy on our skeleton of our feet, and our hands isn't heavy on our skeletal. So then we have irregular bones. Irregular bones are going to be the bones of our vertebrae. You can see the arches and ridges. If I turn it here, you can see right up here. They're just irregular. The long bones make sense when you think about it. The long bones of our humerus, of our femur. We've got our tib fibs, our radius ulnar. These are the long bones. They have the diaphysis, the epiphysis, things like that we've learned about. Those are all there, the shaft of the bone, things like that. The flat bones, again, the flat bones of here up in our parietal skull region are going to be things that are flat when you look at it. So here would be a flat bone. This breastbone would be a flat bone for us. This scapula is a flat bone. You can just see that it makes sense to call it a flat bone because it really is flat. Our sesamoid bone is going to be the bones of our patella here. Each side, our kneecaps are sesamoid bones. Next up, we're going to talk about the cranium, or the head, the skull. So the cranium is made up of several different bones. We have our frontal bone right up front here. We have our temporal bone on the side. We know that because we rub our temples if we kind of forget about that. Our occipital bone back here, what we lay our head back on. The parietal bone up in here. Also, we have the more nasal bones, that ethmoid bone we were talking about, the vomer bone. If we were to get punched right in the nose, sitting behind here, we have our vomer bone. That could potentially break. Our lacrimal bone, when we lacrimate or when we make tears, that's where our lacrimal bone is. We have the zygomatic bone here. We also have the jaw. So there's two parts of the jaw. The maxilla is going to be the upper stationary jaw. The mandible is what moves. That movable mandible is going to be when we chew and when we talk, we're moving our mandible. So we have the sphenoid bone here, this short squamous bone here of the parietal bone. It sits right next to it. Let's see, parietal, temporal. When we're talking about the skull, we also have the auditory ossicles in here that we don't see, but they're down in there. The hyoid bone here is the only bone that is not connected to another bone. It just sits in the cartilage. It's superior to the cricoid cartilage when we're trying to intubate somebody and we just don't have that clear line of vision when we're intubating. We would get a first responder, a partner, a firefighter to push on that cricoid cartilage just beneath that hyoid bone so that it opens up and we can see a nice clear view for intubation. So that's going to sit right up in here. So let's see. So some practical applications that we need to talk about. When we talk about the occipital region, on infants, children, it's a lot larger. So one clinical application as a physician assistant I need to know is this is proportionally larger for an infant than for an adult. So if you're going to lay a baby on a table to work a code if they're in cardiac arrest and you lay them flat, their occipital is bigger, so it's going to push, if you're on the table, it's going to push that airway closed. So what we're going to do is we're going to pad the shoulders so that the head and the occipital region lays back and it opens that airway up. We need to know those things because we're going to be working against ourselves if the baby's like this because it's laying flat. That occipital is on the counter where we're working the baby. It needs to have the shoulders padded so that we have a nice clear open. Another thing that we can talk about for a clinical application is I'm dealing with a mallet finger right now. So I had a synovial cyst here at that DIP joint that burst, ruptured the tendon here. So that DIP joint, they pinned, hyperextended, as we've learned about extension and flexion. So they hyperextended that and they cross-pinned it for 10 weeks. So I wear this hard brace just because it hurts. But as a physician assistant, I can know that something as simple as the tip of the finger can be treated. It can be painful. It can be affect people's lives. I was dropping things. I spoke with my orthopedic surgeon and he said, "What do you want?" I, as a physician assistant, I want to be able to sew. I need the dexterity of my fingers. I need to be able to have full use of this joint. So in order to do that, I have it pinned. It's up nice and hyperflexed. So for 10 weeks, I'll have that. So lots of little things that we don't think about, but that can really benefit the quality of life of our patients. If we know our skeletal system and we know it can be done and we work with other specialties around us, we can really improve the quality of life for our patients.